The radio crackled with the sound of a man accepting his death. Any station, this is Cobra 6. Broken Arrow. I repeat, Broken Arrow at grid 44 Charlie. We are pinned down. Casualties heavy. It's... The voice faltered, drowned by the violent staccato of machine gun fire and the whistle of incoming mortars. It's over. In the Tactical Operations Center 300 miles away, Major Edmund Cross leaned into the microphone, his voice sterile and detached. Cobra 6, this is TOC. Support is negative. Weather has grounded all air assets. You are on your own. Advise you surrender or evade. Over. The word hung in the encrypted frequency like a guillotine blade. Surrender. Negative, TOC. The SEAL team leader's voice was barely audible now, choking on dust and blood and the weight of impossible odds. We're surrounded. Tell my wife I... Static. Then silence. In the corner of the TOC, a man with iron-gray hair and eyes like frozen steel closed his fists so tight his knuckles went white. Colonel Garrett Ironside Sutherland had heard that sound before. The sound of good men dying while bureaucrats listen from safety. The sound of missions going sideways because someone in a clean uniform made the wrong call. He had sworn he would never hear it again, but here it was, and there was nothing he could do. Or so he thought. Cut to black. 72 hours earlier. Forward Operating Base Garrison sat like a scar on the eastern slope of the Colorado Rockies, a collection of prefabricated buildings and razor wire clinging to terrain that didn't want it there. February had turned the surrounding peaks into teeth of ice and stone, beautiful and lethal in equal measure. The kind of place where men went to test themselves against something older and harder than any enemy combatant. The kind of place where legends were born, or destroyed. Sergeant First Class Kira Phantom Ashford stepped off the Black Hawk with her rifle case slung across her back and her eyes hidden behind dark Oakleys. 27 years old, 5'8", lean as a whip, and twice as dangerous. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, her BDUs sharp despite the 12-hour flight from Fort Bragg. She moved with the economy of someone who had learned long ago not to waste energy on unnecessary motion. She had been called back for a reason, a mission so sensitive that the briefing packet had been delivered by courier with a top-secret clearance stamp and instructions to memorize and burn. She hadn't expected him to be here. The Tactical Operations Center was warm compared to the knife-edge wind outside, humming with the white noise of computer servers and radio chatter. A dozen personnel moved between workstations, monitoring satellite feeds and drone telemetry. The smell of burned coffee and electrical equipment hung in the air. And standing near the central map table, arms crossed, jaw set like carved granite, was Colonel Garrett Sutherland. Kira stopped in the doorway. For 3 years, she had avoided this moment. 3 years of reassignments and careful scheduling, of making sure their orbits never intersected. 3 years of carrying the weight of what had happened in the Hindu Kush, the weight of his testimony at the inquiry, the weight of watching the best instructor she had ever known testify against her. Now here he was, older, grayer, the lines around his eyes cut deeper, but the same steel-trap mind behind those pale blue eyes. The same man who had taught her everything she knew about wind, distance, and the cold mathematics of death at long range. The same man who had destroyed her career. Major Edmund Cross looked up from the map table, his expression shifting from concentration to something approximating professional courtesy. Sergeant Ashford, good, you're here. We were beginning to think the weather had delayed your flight. Kira forced her eyes away from Sutherland and focused on the major. No delay, sir. Ready for briefing. Excellent. Cross was 51, career staff officer, the kind of man who had never fired a shot in anger, but could quote the Army Field Manual, chapter and verse. His uniform was immaculate, his posture textbook perfect. Colonel Sutherland, I believe you two know each other. Sutherland's eyes met hers across the room. No warmth, no recognition beyond the clinical assessment of a man evaluating a piece of equipment. "We've met," he said. His voice was gravel over rust, worn down by decades of shouted commands and whispered kill confirmations. "Fort Benning, Scout Sniper School, 6 years ago." "Yes, sir." Kira kept her voice neutral, professional, gave him nothing. Cross seemed oblivious to the tension crackling between them, like static electricity before a lightning strike. "The colonel has graciously agreed to serve as tactical advisor for this operation. His experience in long-range interdiction will be invaluable for planning." Tactical advisor, desk job. For a man like Sutherland, that was an insult dressed up in diplomatic language. He was 72 years old, technically retired, technically a civilian contractor, but he was still Ironside. Still the man who had made shots that younger snipers whispered about in the dark. Still the legend who had trained half the elite marksmen currently operating in the sandbox. And now he was sitting in the TOC while others went downrange. Kira wondered if that burned him as much as she hoped it did. Cross pulled up a digital map on the main display. Topographical lines crowded together, showing steep terrain and elevation changes that would make any operation a nightmare. Operation Silent Shepherd. The target is a high-value individual, Abdullah Nazari, currently hiding in a village in the Kestrel Valley. He zoomed in, highlighting a cluster of buildings nestled in a narrow canyon. Nazari is responsible for coordinating attacks on coalition forces across 3 provinces. Actionable intelligence places him at this location for the next 48 hours. Cross tapped the screen. SEAL Team Cobra 6 will insert via helicopter at 0200 Zulu time. Fast rope insertion, hard breach on the target compound, extract the HVT. Standard direct action. He pulled back to show the surrounding terrain. Overwatch will be provided from Observation Post Ridge Alpha. A red icon appeared on a ridgeline 1,200 meters from the village. Elevation advantage, clear line of sight to all egress routes, standard engagement distance for counter-sniper protocols. Kira studied the map. Her eyes traced the terrain, the dead spaces, the angles. Something about Ridge Alpha made her teeth itch. It was too obvious, too perfect. The kind of position that looked good on a map but felt wrong in her gut. "Sir," she said quietly, "Ridge Alpha is the highest ground in the immediate area." "Correct," Cross said, pleased. "Excellent elevation for Overwatch. It's also the most obvious position for Overwatch." Kira leaned forward, pointing at the ridge. "If the enemy has any tactical awareness, they'll have that position pre-sighted for mortars. They'll expect us there." Cross's expression cooled several degrees. "Our intelligence assessment indicates minimal enemy presence. The target's security detail is small, poorly trained. They won't have the sophistication for pre-planned fire positions." "Intelligence was wrong about the last 3 operations I worked," Kira said. Her voice remained level, but there was steel underneath. "I'd prefer to position somewhere less predictable." "Your preferences are noted, Sergeant." Cross straightened, dismissing her concern with the casual arrogance of a man who had never been on the wrong end of a mortar barrage. "However, this mission will be conducted according to established protocols and rules of engagement. Ridge Alpha provides optimal fields of fire within acceptable engagement parameters. You will position there, provide overwatch for the SEAL element, and engage only on positive identification of hostile threat to friendly forces." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I've read your file, Ashford. Your record shows a tendency toward improvisation. That won't be tolerated on this operation. You will stick to the plan. You will follow the ROE. Am I clear?" Kira felt the old anger rising in her chest, hot and bitter. The same anger that had gotten her demoted, reassigned, nearly court-martialed. The anger that came from watching men in air-conditioned rooms make decisions that got men in the field killed. "Crystal clear, sir." "Good." Cross turned back to the map, already moving on. You'll insert 12 hours prior to the SEAL element. That gives you time to establish position, range the target area, and prepare fire solutions. Any questions? Kira had 100 questions, but she knew better than to ask them. No, sir. Dismissed. Get your gear squared away. Wheels up at 1600 hours. Kira saluted, turned on her heel, and headed for the door. Sergeant Ashford. Sutherland's voice stopped her mid-stride. She turned slowly. The old man was watching her with those pale eyes that had seen things in Berlin and Beirut that he never talked about. Eyes that could read wind speed from grass movement and measure distance by the way light bent through heat shimmer. A word, he said, not a request. Cross glanced between them, sensing something he didn't understand. Make it quick, Colonel. I need this room prepped for the op brief. Sutherland nodded and walked toward the side entrance, not bothering to check if Kira followed. She did because despite everything, despite the anger and the bitterness and the 3 years of silence, he was still Ironside. And you didn't ignore Ironside. The hallway outside the TOC was empty, lit by harsh, fluorescent tubes that made everything look washed out and cold. Sutherland stopped near a window overlooking the vehicle depot. His hands clasped behind his back in a parade rest that was as natural to him as breathing. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared out at the mountains, at the peaks turning pink and gold in the late afternoon sun. You're planning something, he said finally. It wasn't a question. Kira kept her expression neutral. Sir? Don't. He turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something other than cold assessment in his eyes. Something that might have been concern, or warning, or both. Don't play games with me, Phantom. I taught you how to read terrain. I also taught you how to lie. You're good at both, but I'm better. He stepped closer, dropping his voice. You were studying that map like you were planning a route, not to Ridge Alpha, somewhere else. Kira said nothing. Sutherland's jaw tightened. There's only one position in that AO with better elevation than Ridge Alpha. The locals call it Devil's Gate. 14,200 feet. Sheer approach, exposed position, altitude that'll drop your O2 saturation into the danger zone. His eyes bored into hers. Distance to target, over 3,000 meters. That's outside effective range for a standard engagement, yes. Sutherland's voice was quiet, dangerous. But you're not planning a standard engagement, are you? Kira met his stare and didn't flinch. I'm planning to follow orders, sir. Ridge Alpha, 1,200 meters, standard protocols. Bullshit. The word hung between them like a slap. You're going to climb to Devil's Gate, Sutherland continued, his voice hard as the granite peaks outside. You're going to set up at an altitude that'll kill you in 90 minutes. You're going to attempt shots at a distance that exceeds every training manual we ever wrote. And you're going to do it because you think you know better than everyone else in that room. He leaned in closer. Just like you did in the Kush. There it was, the wound they'd both been dancing around. Kira felt her control slipping, felt the words rising in her throat before she could stop them. Those Rangers are alive because of what I did in the Kush. 2 of them aren't Rangers anymore, Sutherland shot back. 2 of them have permanent injuries because you decided to disobey a direct order and provide fire support from a position I explicitly told you was untenable. You got lucky, Sergeant. The numbers worked. But luck isn't a plan. The numbers always work, Kira said, her voice tight. You taught me that. Calculate the variables, trust the ballistics, make the shot. That's what I did. I also taught you when not to take the shot. Sutherland's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I taught you that some risks aren't worth taking, that some shots, no matter how perfect the calculations, aren't worth the cost if they fail. He turned back to the window, and for a moment he looked every one of his 72 years. Beirut, 1983. I was 31 years old, thought I was invincible, had a shot on a terrorist cell leader, 2,600 meters across the rubble of the Marine barracks. Wind was tricky, atmospheric conditions were garbage, but the ballistics looked good, so I took it. Kira had never heard this story. Sutherland didn't talk about Beirut. Missed by 4 inches, he continued, his voice hollow. 4 inches. The target got away. 3 months later, he coordinated an attack that killed 12 Marines. 12 lives. Because I was arrogant enough to think I could make a shot that shouldn't have been attempted. He turned back to her, and there was something raw in his eyes now. Something she'd never seen before. Pain. Old and deep and never healed. That's why I testified against you at the inquiry, Phantom. Not because I wanted to destroy your career, because I saw myself in you. That same arrogance, that same certainty that the ballistics will always work. And I couldn't let you keep walking that path. Because when the numbers fail, people die. Kira's throat was tight. The numbers didn't fail in the Kush. No, but they will. Someday. Sutherland's voice was gentle now, almost sad. And when they do, you'll carry those bodies the rest of your life. Just like I do. He straightened, the moment of vulnerability passing, the iron mask sliding back into place. So I'm asking you, one last time, don't climb to Devil's Gate. Take the safe position. Follow the plan. Let the SEALs do their job. Kira looked at him for a long moment. This man who had taught her everything. This man who had broken her career to save her from herself. I can't make that promise, sir. Something that might have been disappointment flickered across Sutherland's face. Or maybe it was resignation. Then God help those SEALs. Because when you're hanging off that mountain at 14,000 feet, hypoxic and hypothermic, there won't be anyone to help you. He walked past her, heading back toward the TOC. Ironside, Kira called after him. He stopped, but didn't turn around. Why did you come back? You're retired. You don't owe the Army anything anymore. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then quietly, because I heard your name on the roster, and I thought maybe, one last time, I could keep you from making the same mistakes I did. He walked away, leaving Kira alone in the hallway, with the weight of his words settling on her shoulders like snow. She stood there for several minutes, staring at nothing, thinking about ballistics and risk, and the difference between confidence and arrogance. Thinking about Sutherland's face when he talked about those 12 Marines. Thinking about what it would feel like to carry bodies like that. Then she pulled out her personal tablet and brought up the topographical map of the Kestrel Valley. Her fingers traced the elevation lines, calculating approach routes and exposure times, and the 100 variables that would turn Devil's Gate from a theory into a reality. The climb would be brutal. 4 hours minimum, hauling 80 pounds of gear up a 60-degree granite face in sub-zero temperatures. The position itself would be exposed, vulnerable to counter battery fire if the enemy triangulated her position. The altitude would wreck her O2 saturation, maybe induce altitude sickness, definitely impair her decision-making after 90 minutes. And the shot, 3,280 meters, nearly 2 miles. A bullet flight time of almost 6 seconds, long enough for wind to shift, for thermal layers to bend the trajectory, for a target to move from the crosshairs to safety. Long enough for doubt to creep in, for the hand to shake, for the calculations to fail. It was, by any reasonable standard, an impossible shot. But Kira had spent 6 years learning from a man who had made impossible shots. She had spent 3 years proving that she could do it without him. And she had spent the last 72 hours studying the terrain around Ridge Alpha, seeing the trap that Major Cross was too blind to recognize. Ridge Alpha was a kill box waiting to happen. Devil's Gate was the only position that made sense. She closed the tablet and headed for the equipment room to prep her gear. The numbers would work. They had to, because if they didn't, those SEALs were dead. And this time, there would be no one to testify at the inquiry, because she'd be dead right alongside them. At 1600 hours, A UH-60 Black Hawk lifted off from FOB Garrison, carrying one sniper and enough equipment to wage a small war. The crew chief handed Kira a headset, but she waved it off. The noise of the rotors was preferable to conversation. Below, the Colorado Rockies unfolded in a chaos of stone and ice, beautiful and merciless. The late afternoon sun painted the peaks in shades of amber and crimson, light that would be gone in 2 hours, replaced by the kind of darkness that swallowed sound and direction and hope. Kira checked her gear for the third time. Habit, ritual, the small ceremonies that kept a sniper sane. The rifle case held her Chi-Tac Intervention M200, chambered in .375 Chi-Tac, arguably the finest long-range precision rifle ever built. 30 pounds of machined steel and carbon fiber, capable of reaching out past 2 miles with the right ammunition and the right shooter. She had named it Testament because it bore witness to things that should never be forgotten. Beside it, 50 rounds of 350-grain solid copper boat-tail bullets. Each round hand-loaded, each charge measured to within 1/10 of a grain, each cartridge worth more than most people spent on groceries. At these distances, ammunition wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in lives saved or lost. Her pack held the supporting equipment: Night Force scope with 34mm tube and variable magnification up to 32 times. Kestrel 5700 ballistic weather meter with integrated calculator. Harris bipod, rear shooting bag, laser rangefinder, thermal imaging monocular, night vision, 3 days of freeze-dried rations, water purification tablets, chemical heat packs, survival blanket. And buried at the bottom, wrapped in a waterproof bag, a trauma kit with tourniquets and hemostatic gauze, and enough morphine to either save her life or make her final hours bearable. The loadout weighed 83 pounds. She would carry every ounce of it up 4,000 vertical feet in 4 hours. The helicopter began its descent, dropping into a narrow valley where the FOB had established a forward staging area. Nothing more than a flat space bulldozed from the mountainside, ringed with HESCO barriers and concertina wire. A single prefab shelter and a fuel depot. The bird touched down, rotors still spinning, ready for immediate departure. Kira grabbed her gear and jumped out, keeping her head low beneath the rotor wash. The crew chief gave her a thumbs up, and 30 seconds later, the Black Hawk was airborne again, thundering back toward Garrison, leaving her alone. The staging area commander, a harried-looking captain named Morrison, met her at the HESCO barrier. "Sergeant Ashford, Captain Morrison, I'll be coordinating your movement to the OP." "Yes, sir." Morrison handed her a laminated card with grid coordinates and radio frequencies. Ridge Alpha is 4 kilometers northwest, elevation gain of 1,800 feet. The trail is marked with IR chem lights, only visible through nods. Weather forecast calls for clear skies tonight, winds 10 to 15 knots from the west. You should have good conditions for the shot. Kira nodded, not bothering to tell him she wouldn't be going to Ridge Alpha. "What's the enemy situation?" "Quiet. We've had aerial surveillance over the target area for the past week. Minimal activity, no indication they know we're coming." Morrison checked his watch. "SEAL team inserts in 14 hours. You've got until then to get in position and dial in your dope. Any questions?" "No, sir." "Good hunting, Sergeant." Morrison extended his hand. Kira shook it, shouldered her pack, and walked out of the wire into the gathering darkness. For the first 2 kilometers, she followed the marked trail, moving at a steady pace that ate up ground without burning energy. The terrain was steep but manageable, switchbacks cutting across granite slopes studded with scrub pine and patches of old snow. Her breath came easy despite the altitude, the result of years spent training in mountains exactly like these. At the 2-kilometer mark, where the trail curved west toward Ridge Alpha, Kira stopped. She pulled out her GPS and confirmed her position. Then she looked north, toward the dark, massive peaks that blocked out the stars. Somewhere up there, hidden in the vertical chaos of the Rockies, was Devil's Gate. Kira cached her approach marker, a small IR strobe that would help her find her way back if the operation went sideways. Then she turned north and started climbing. The terrain changed immediately. No more trail, no more switchbacks, just raw mountain, all vertical and unforgiving. She picked her way across boulder fields, hands and feet finding purchase on stone that felt like frozen bone. The temperature dropped with each 100 feet of elevation, wind funneling through gaps in the rock, carrying the smell of snow and altitude. After an hour, she stopped to check her vitals. Heart rate elevated but steady, breathing controlled, core temperature good, O2 saturation 91%, still functional but dropping. At 14,000 feet, it would be in the 80s, hypoxia territory, where judgment got fuzzy and mistakes became fatal. She kept climbing. The second hour was harder. The angle steepened, forcing her to use her hands more, pulling herself up with arms that were starting to burn. The rifle case dug into her back, 80 pounds of dead weight trying to pull her backward off the mountain. She ignored it. Pain was just information. Information could be filed away and examined later. At the 3-hour mark, the granite face in front of her turned vertical. A sheer cliff, maybe 40 feet high, smooth as glass, impossible to free climb with her current load. Kira stopped, breathing hard, and studied the obstacle. To the left, a narrow chimney crack split the cliff face. Wide enough to wedge her body into, rough enough to provide friction. It would be slow, technical, exposed. One mistake and she'd fall 60 feet onto the rocks below. She unclipped her pack and tied it off to her harness with a length of paracord. Then she started up the chimney. Feet braced on one wall, back pressed against the other. She inched upward in a brutal sequence of pressure and release, pressure and release. The pack swung below her, pulling at her harness, throwing off her balance. Her breath echoed in the narrow space, ragged and harsh. 20 feet, 30. Her legs screamed, muscles burning with the accumulated lactic acid of 3 hours climbing. 40 feet. Her hand found the lip of the cliff, and she pulled herself over, sprawling on flat ground, gasping in air that felt like it had no oxygen in it at all. She lay there for 2 minutes, no more. Then she stood up, shouldered her pack, and kept moving. The 4th hour was a blur of stone and ice, and the mechanical repetition of one foot in front of the other. The world narrowed to the small circle of ground visible in her headlamp, the rest swallowed by darkness so complete it felt like a physical weight pressing down. And then finally, the ground leveled out. Kira checked her GPS. Elevation, 14,187 feet. Grid coordinates matched the position she'd identified on the map. Devil's Gate. She killed her headlamp and let her eyes adjust to the darkness. Slowly, the world revealed itself. She was standing on a narrow ledge, maybe 8 feet wide and 20 feet long, carved into the southern face of the peak. Behind her, the mountain continued upward into the night. In front, the ledge ended in a sheer drop that fell away into nothing. And beyond that drop, 3,280 meters to the north, invisible in the darkness, but burned into her memory from 100 map studies, was the Kestrel Valley. Kira unslung her pack and began the methodical process of setting up her hide. It wasn't much, a low-profile position tucked against the back wall of the ledge, camouflage netting rigged to break up her silhouette, shooting mat laid out to keep her body off the frozen stone. She assembled the chai tack with cold-numbed fingers, each piece fitting together with the precision of a Swiss watch. Barrel screwed into receiver, bolt carrier group locked into place, magazine seated with a solid click. The weapon complete, she set it on the bipod and got into position behind it. Prone, cheek welded to the stock, eye aligned with the scope. And for the first time since arriving on Devil's Gate, she allowed herself to look at the valley below. Even without magnification, she could see the scattered lights of the village, tiny pinpricks of yellow in the vast darkness. Through the thermal scope, the world transformed into shades of gray and white, heat signatures standing out against the cold background. She found the target building, the largest structure in the village, exactly where the intelligence brief had indicated. Two heat signatures on the roof, probable sentries. She panned left, scanning the approaches. More heat signatures scattered through the village, maybe 20 total. Hard to tell if they were combatants or civilians from this distance. Then she swept her scope toward Ridge Alpha, the position Major Cross had assigned her, and her blood went cold. Three heat signatures, prone, spaced 10 meters apart along the ridge, not moving, not patrolling, waiting. The enemy knew. They had pre-positioned a counter-sniper team exactly where American doctrine said the overwatch would be. If Kira had followed orders, she would have walked straight into an ambush. They would have cut her throat before she ever unslung her rifle. And without overwatch, the SEAL team would insert into a trap they didn't know existed. Kira's hand moved to her radio, thumb hovering over the push-to-talk button. She should call it in. Report the enemy position, abort the mission, replan with accurate intelligence. But if she transmitted now, the enemy counter-snipers would pick up the signal strength. They'd know someone was close. They might trigger their ambush early, or worse, they might vanish into the night and reappear when the SEALs were most vulnerable. She lowered her hand from the radio. The only advantage she had was that the enemy didn't know she was here. They were watching Ridge Alpha, waiting for an American sniper who would never arrive. They had no idea that death was already looking at them from a mountain peak 2 miles away. Kira pulled out her Kestrel and took atmospheric readings. Temperature, -15 Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure, 26.44 inches of mercury. Wind, variable, gusting between 12 and 18 knots from the west-northwest. She fed the data into the ballistic calculator, along with range, elevation angle, and ammunition specifications. The little device hummed, processing variables that would have taken her 10 minutes to calculate by hand. Then it displayed the solution. To hit a target at 3,280 meters with a .375 ShyTac firing a 350-grain bullet at 3,000 feet per second, from a firing position 3,000 feet higher than the target, in a 15-knot crosswind, she would need 62 minutes of angle elevation adjustment, 3.4 mils of windage. Time of flight, 5.8 seconds. Total bullet drop from line of sight, 43 inches. Spin drift compensation, 8 inches right. Coriolis effect compensation, 12 inches right at this latitude. The numbers looked insane. She would be aiming at a point in space 4 feet above and 2 feet to the left of her target, trusting that gravity and wind and the rotation of the Earth itself would bend the bullet's path down and over and into a human torso the size of a laptop screen, at 2 miles away. After nearly 6 seconds of flight, in conditions that would kill her if she stayed exposed for more than 90 minutes, Kira adjusted her scope turrets, feeling each click vibrate through her frozen fingers. 62 minutes of angle, 74 clicks on the elevation turret, 3.4 mils windage, 12 clicks left. She settled back behind the scope and found her first target. One of the counter-snipers on Ridge Alpha. Range, 3,310 meters, slightly farther than the village, but similar atmospheric conditions. She centered the crosshairs on the heat signature, then adjusted her point of aim according to the calculator. The reticle now floated in empty space 4 feet above the prone figure. It looked completely wrong. Every instinct screamed that she was aiming at nothing. But the ballistics were the ballistics. Kira's finger found the trigger. 2 pounds of pressure on a crisp, glass-smooth break. She didn't pull it. Not yet. 14 hours until the SEALs inserted. 14 hours that would stretch to 15 before the last round was fired. 14 hours to wait on this frozen ledge, watching, calculating, preparing. 14 hours to second-guess every decision that had brought her here. 14 hours to wonder if Sutherland was right, if the numbers would fail, if she was about to get good men killed because she was too arrogant to follow orders. Her breath fogged the inside of her scope. She wiped it clear and kept watching. Below, in the darkness, the enemy waited. And Kira Phantom Ashford, 27 years old, alone on a mountain peak that was slowly killing her, whispered into the frozen night, "Trust the ballistics," because it was all she had left. The cold came in stages. First, it took the extremities. Kira felt her toes go numb inside her boots around hour 3 of her vigil, the cold seeping through layers of wool and Gore-Tex like water finding cracks in stone. Her fingers followed an hour later, the fine motor control she needed for precision shooting gradually degrading into clumsy mechanical motion. Then it went deeper. By hour 8, the cold had penetrated her core, a creeping hypothermia that her body fought with violent shivering. She cycled through chemical heat packs, tucking fresh ones inside her jacket, against her lower back, anywhere the warmth might buy her another 30 minutes of operational capacity. By hour 12, the shivering had stopped. That was bad. That meant her body had given up trying to generate heat, was now rationing energy to keep vital organs functioning. Her thought process had slowed, each calculation taking longer than it should. Her vision had narrowed at the edges, tunnel vision creeping in. She checked her watch. 0143 Zulu time. 17 minutes until the seals inserted. 17 minutes until she found out if the calculations would hold. The radio crackled to life in her earpiece, breaking the silence she'd maintained for 13 hours. "All stations, this is TOC. Cobra 6 is wheels up. I repeat, Cobra 6 is airborne. ETA to LZ, 12 minutes. Major Cross's voice, clinical, detached, speaking from a heated operations center 300 miles away, where coffee was hot and the biggest danger was a paper cut. Kira didn't respond. Radio silence was still her only advantage. Through her thermal scope, she watched the valley. The village had been quiet for hours. Most of the heat signatures she'd counted earlier now disappeared into buildings, seeking warmth. Only the sentries remained visible. 2 on the target building rooftop, 3 more on Ridge Alpha, still waiting in their ambush position for an American sniper who would never arrive. Patient, disciplined, professional. That meant whoever was running the enemy security detail knew what they were doing. Knew American tactics, American doctrine, American predictability. They just didn't know about her. Kira pulled the Kestrel from inside her jacket, where she'd been keeping it warm. Fresh, atmospheric reading. The wind had shifted in the last hour, backing from west-northwest to almost due west. That changed everything. New calculation. 3.7 mils windage now. 13 clicks left on the scope. She made the adjustment, the turret clicks sounding unnaturally loud in the frozen silence. Her O2 saturation was 79%, clinically hypoxic. She could feel it in the way her thoughts moved like they were pushing through syrup, the way her peripheral vision had gone gray and fuzzy. 90 minutes at this altitude, Sutherland had said. She'd been here for 13 hours. Spite was keeping her conscious. Spite and the cold physics of ballistics and the stubborn refusal to let Major Cross's assumptions about Ridge Alpha get good men killed. The sound reached her before the visual. A deep, rhythmic thumping, the distinctive signature of a MH-47 Chinook's twin rotors echoing off the canyon walls. Kira shifted her scope toward the insertion point, a flat area on the valley floor 800 meters west of the village. Through the thermal imaging, the helicopter appeared as a massive, white-hot signature, rotors blurring the air into heat wash. Fast ropes dropped from both sides. Dark shapes slid down with practice speed. 12 seconds from rope deployment to wheels up. Textbook perfect. The Chinook banked hard and thundered away, the sound of its departure swallowed by the mountains. And in the sudden silence that followed, Kira heard Wyatt Brenner's voice on the command net. TOC Cobra 6, touchdown, LZ Cold, proceeding to objective. Cold. The SEAL team leader thought the landing zone was uncontested. He had no idea that 10 enemy fighters were tracking his every movement, waiting for the perfect moment to spring the trap. Kira centered her crosshairs on the target building, watching the heat signatures on the roof. One of them was moving now, raising something to his shoulder. RPG. The tube was unmistakable through thermal. A Soviet-era RPG-7, probably loaded with a PG-7VL warhead, capable of punching through vehicle armor or turning unprotected infantry into pink mist. Below, the SEAL element was moving in a tactical column toward the village, using the dead ground and sparse vegetation for concealment. Professional, careful, completely unaware that they were walking into a coordinated ambush. Kira didn't aim at the RPG gunner. At 3,280 meters, a human torso was too small a target, too much margin for error. Instead, she aimed at the mud brick wall directly beneath his position, calculating that the impact and spalling effect would be enough to disrupt his shot. She found her breathing rhythm, in for 4 counts, hold for 2, out for 4, hold for 2. The respiratory pause, that moment between breaths when the body was perfectly still. In the pause, her heart rate slowed. The world narrowed to the glowing green crosshairs floating in space 4 feet above the wall. The calculations held. The numbers were sound. Her finger took up the trigger slack. 2 pounds of pressure, smooth, steady, inevitable. The Chi-Tak roared. The recoil was brutal at this altitude, where the thin air provided less resistance. The muzzle brake vented gases to the sides, with enough force to kick up a cloud of snow around her position. The rifle slammed back into her shoulder, a bone-jarring impact that would leave bruises she wouldn't feel for days, if she lived that long. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The bullet was climbing now, arcing high above the valley floor, reaching the apex of its trajectory nearly 100 feet above the line of sight. 4 seconds. Gravity reclaimed it. The bullet began its descent, accelerating, guided by nothing but physics and desperation. 5 seconds. In the valley below, the RPG gunner steadied his aim on the approaching SEAL element, finger tightening on the trigger. 6 seconds. The wall exploded. Not from explosive force, but from pure kinetic energy. 350 grains of solid copper traveling at supersonic speed, carrying enough momentum to shatter mud brick and mortar into high-velocity shrapnel. The gunner caught the spray of stone fragments full in the chest and face. The thermal image showed him jerking backward, the RPG tube tilting skyward, the rocket firing wild. The warhead streaked up into the night sky, exploding harmlessly 200 feet above the village in a flash of orange light. And in the valley, all hell broke loose. "Contact! Contact front!" Wyatt Brenner's voice cracked over the radio, the professional calm fracturing. "RPG! We're taking fire from the village!" The ambush sprung like a steel trap. Muzzle flashes erupted from windows and rooftops. The PKM machine gun that Kira had identified in the riverbed opened up, green tracers lashing across the darkness, chewing up the ground where the SEALs had gone to cover. "Cobra 6, this is TOC. Major Cross, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Sit rep. We're pinned down. Heavy contact from multiple positions." Wyatt was shouting now, barely audible over the sustained gunfire. "We have casualties. Need immediate CAS. Negative Cobra 6. All air assets are grounded due to weather. You are on your own. Advise you break contact and evade to secondary extraction point." There was a pause. Then Wyatt's voice, raw with the realization of what that order meant. "We can't break contact. We're boxed in. It's a goddamn kill zone." In the TOC, 300 miles away, Kira could picture Sutherland standing at the map table, hands clenched into fists, listening to good men die because someone made the wrong call about Ridge Alpha. She racked the bolt of the ShyTac, the spent brass casing ejected in a lazy arc, landing in the snow beside her with a soft hiss as the superheated metal met ice. She chambered a fresh round. The bolt locked forward with a solid mechanical click that she felt through her whole body. "Seal element, this is Phantom." Her voice on the radio, calm and cold as the mountain air, cutting through the chaos like a scalpel. There was a beat of stunned silence. Then Wyatt, "Who is this? We have no Overwatch element deployed." "You do now," Kira said. "Hold your position. First round is already downrange. Time of flight for the next one is 6 seconds. Do not move." "What? Where are you? We can't see." "You're not supposed to see me. I'm 2 miles above you." Kira was already acquiring her next target, the PKM gunner in the riverbed, who was pouring fire into the SEAL's position. "Machine gun, you're 9 o'clock, dried riverbed. Stand by." She didn't wait for acknowledgement. The target was moving, adjusting fire, and every second of delay was another burst of 7.62 millimeter rounds tearing into the mud wall that was the only thing keeping the SEALs alive. The PKM gunner was prone, presenting maybe 12 inches of vertical target. At this range, that was essentially invisible. But the weapon itself was larger, the receiver and barrel assembly creating a heat signature she could track. She didn't aim for the man. She aimed for the machine gun. Wind had shifted again. She could see it in the way snow was blowing off the ridge to her east, the pattern telling her what the Kestrel had already calculated. 15 knots now, gusting to 18. 4 mils of holdoff, 14 clicks. She adjusted, settled, found the pause between heartbeats, fired. The world compressed into that 6-second interval. 6 seconds where the bullet flew invisible through the night, subject to forces she could calculate but not control. Wind shear, thermal layers, the Coriolis effect of the Earth's rotation pulling the round fractionally right. The PKM machine gun's muzzle flash disappeared from her thermal scope. Through her earpiece she heard Wyatt's voice, filled with something between disbelief and hope. "Gun down! The PKM is down! How the hell?" "Don't ask questions," Kira interrupted, already scanning for the next threat. "Just listen. You've got enemy on Ridge Alpha, your 3 o'clock high. Counter-sniper team, 3 shooters. They're adjusting fire on your position now." "Phantom, this is TOC," Major Cross's voice, sharp with authority and anger. "Identify your position and explain why you're not at assigned OP." Kira ignored him. The enemy snipers on Ridge Alpha were her immediate problem. They'd seen the muzzle flash from her first shots, were probably trying to triangulate her position right now. And if they had a mortar team in support, they could start walking rounds up the mountain toward her. She found the leftmost sniper through her scope. Range, 3,310 meters. Slightly uphill angle, which added complexity to the calculation. But the wind was more consistent at that elevation, less turbulent. "Phantom, acknowledge!" Cross was practically shouting now. "You are in violation of..." Kira reached down and switched her radio to a different frequency, one that would let her communicate with the SEAL element but cut out the TOC. Sutherland would figure out what she'd done. He'd cover for her or he wouldn't. Either way, she didn't have time for Cross's bureaucratic panic. "Cobra 6, I'm engaging the counter-sniper team. Keep your heads down." She fired before Wyatt could respond. The enemy sniper on Ridge Alpha never knew what killed him. One moment he was sighting down his rifle, searching the darkness for the American position. The next, a .375 bullet traveling at 2,700 feet per second erased him from existence. Kira worked the bolt with mechanical efficiency. 2 more rounds. 2 more snipers eliminated in the span of 20 seconds. Ridge Alpha went dark. "Holy shit!" Someone on the SEAL team breathed over the radio. "Phantom, what are you shooting? Artillery?" "Close enough," Kira muttered, cycling the bolt again. Her shoulder was starting to go numb from the accumulated recoil, each shot driving the steel butt plate into flesh that was already bruised. She scanned the village, counting remaining targets. The RPG gunner on the roof was down, probably dead or badly wounded from the wall spalling. The PKM was silent. The counter-sniper team was eliminated. But there were still fighters moving through the village, still muzzle flashes from windows, still incoming fire pinning the SEALs against a mud wall that was steadily disintegrating under the sustained barrage. Kira engaged targets methodically. A rifleman in a second-story window, another emerging from an alley with an RPG tube. Each shot required a new calculation, a new hold, a new 6-second interval of uncertainty. She was on her 10th round when the weather changed. It happened in seconds. One moment, Kira's thermal scope showed clear images of the battlefield. The next, a wall of white static washed across her view as a sudden wind gust carried a cloud of ice crystals down from the higher peaks. Whiteout. The atmospheric conditions she'd spent 13 hours calculating, the wind patterns she'd memorized, the thermal layers she'd accounted for, all of it went to hell. Her Kestrel showed the temperature dropping 10 degrees in 3 minutes, barometric pressure falling, wind velocity spiking to 25 knots with gusts over 40. The ballistic calculator flashed an error message. Too many variables changing too fast for accurate computation. She was shooting blind now. "Phantom, we've got movement on our left flank." Wyatt's voice was tight with controlled fear. "Multiple contacts, maybe 50 meters out. Can you see them?" Kira strained her eyes against the thermal scope. Through the swirling white chaos, she could barely make out gray smudges against a gray background. Heat signatures, maybe, or just thermal noise from the storm. "Negative clear visual," she said. "Stand by." She couldn't see the target, couldn't calculate accurate windage, couldn't compensate for the atmospheric turbulence that was probably bending her bullet's path by feet instead of inches. Every rule she'd ever learned said, don't take the shot, wait for conditions to improve, wait for visibility. But the SEALs didn't have time to wait. Kira made a guess. Pure instinct, no calculations to back it up. 6 mils left. Trust that the wind was quartering from the west. Trust that the target was where the thermal smudge suggested. Trust luck, because the physics had just become impossible to predict. She fired. 6 seconds of not knowing. 6 seconds of doubt crawling through her hypoxic brain, whispering that she just sent a round into empty air, or worse, into one of the SEALs taking cover behind that disintegrating wall. "Miss!" Wyatt shouted. "No impact!" Kira's stomach dropped. The first miss. Sutherland had been right. Some shots shouldn't be attempted. She adjusted. 2 more clicks left. 1 click down on elevation. Working on feel now, on experience, on the accumulated wisdom of 6 years behind a rifle. Fired again. This time through the thermal static, she saw the heat signature split apart. One piece dropped, the other scattered. "Hit! Contact down!" Relief flooded Wyatt's voice. "Keep it coming, Phantom!" But the enemy had heard enough. The distinctive crack of a .375 Shytac echoing off the valley walls was unmistakable. They knew someone was shooting from the high peaks, and they had mortars. Kira heard the hollow thump, thump, thump of tubes firing, distant but distinct. She'd heard that sound before, in the Hindu Kush, right before the world turned into fire and shrapnel. She didn't move, couldn't move. If she abandoned her position now, the SEALs would die in the valley below. She was their only overwatch, their only chance. The first mortar round impacted 500 meters below her position, a gray puff of smoke against the darker gray of the mountain. They were bracketing her elevation, walking rounds up the slope. Second round, 300 meters below, getting closer. Kira found another target in the chaos below. Enemy fighters were using the whiteout to advance on the SEAL position, knowing the Americans couldn't see them coming through the storm. She fired. The round went wide, deflected by winds that were now completely unpredictable. Third mortar round, 100 meters below. She could feel the concussion now, a pressure wave transmitted through the stone beneath her. Adjusted, fired again. This time the target dropped. Fourth mortar round. This one didn't miss. The explosion came from 50 meters above her position, the mortar impacting on the cliff face and detonating in a shower of granite fragments. The concussion wave in the thin air was devastating, an invisible fist that lifted Kira's chest off the ground and slammed her back down onto the frozen stone. Her vision went white, not from snow, from the shock wave disrupting her optic nerves. Her ears rang with a high-pitched tone that drowned out everything else. She tasted copper, felt wetness on her upper lip. Blood. Her nose was bleeding from the overpressure. "Phantom! Phantom, respond!" Wyatt's voice was a tinny buzz in her earpiece, barely audible through the tinnitus. Kira shook her head, trying to clear the stars dancing across her vision. Her scope lens had a crack running through it now, spiderwebbing from the edge, but the reticle still worked. The scope still held 0. That was all that mattered. "Still here," she rasped into the radio. Her voice sounded strange, distant. "Adjusting fire." She scanned the valley, looking for the mortar team that had almost killed her. They'd be on the far side of the village, hidden in dead ground where she couldn't get a direct shot. But she could see the launch flash. The next time they fired, the muzzle blast would show up on thermal like a flare. There, a bright bloom of heat, gone in a fraction of a second, but long enough for her to mark the position. Range, 3,450 meters. Uphill shot. Wind unknown. Atmospheric conditions garbage. Her brain running on fumes and spite. She didn't aim for the mortar crew. She aimed for the ammunition stockpile she knew would be nearby. Mortars ate through rounds fast. They'd have crates of ordnance staged next to the firing position. One round, into a target she couldn't see, hoping to hit ammunition she could only guess was there. The numbers had already failed once. This was pure desperation. She fired. 6 seconds. The valley below turned white, not snow white, fire white. The secondary explosion when her bullet found the ammunition stockpile was spectacular even through her cracked scope lens. A mushroom cloud of flame and shrapnel that vaporized the mortar crew and sent a shockwave rolling across the village. "Jesus Christ," someone breathed over the radio. "Phantom, did you just—" "Mortar team eliminated," Kira said. Her hands were shaking now, the accumulated stress in cold and hypoxia finally breaking through her control. "Cobra 6, what's your status?" "We're still pinned down, but the fire's slackening." Wyatt's voice was tight but functional. "We're moving to alternate position, trying to reach the extraction point." "Copy. I'll provide covering fire." She scanned the village again, looking for targets. The whiteout was clearing slightly, the wind gust that had brought it beginning to fade. Through the thinning static, she could see heat signatures moving. And then she saw something that made her blood go cold. Headlights. Multiple vehicles, approaching fast from the South Road. "Cobra 6, be advised, I have vehicle movement, you're 6 o'clock. Looks like technical trucks. 3 vehicles, closing on your position." Technical trucks. Toyota Hiluxes or similar, with heavy machine guns mounted in the beds. Fast, mobile, deadly. If they reached the village before the SEALs extracted, it was over. And between the SEAL position and the extraction point was a choke point, an old concrete bridge spanning a narrow gorge, the only way across for vehicles. If those trucks crossed that bridge, they'd cut off the escape route. "We can't beat them to the bridge," Wyatt said, his voice flat with the realization. "We're carrying wounded. If they cross before we do, we're trapped." Kira centered her scope on the lead truck. It was bouncing across rough terrain, headlights jerking up and down. Moving target. Lateral movement across her field of view. Distance, 2,970 meters. Time of flight would be 5.8 seconds. In 5.8 seconds, that truck would travel 75 meters at its current speed. She had to aim at empty air 75 meters ahead of where the truck was now. trusting it would maintain speed and direction, trusting the driver wouldn't brake or swerve, trusting that the wind wouldn't shift in the next 6 seconds. And she couldn't just disable the truck. If she hit the engine, momentum would carry it forward. It might still cross the bridge before stopping. She needed to stop it on the bridge. Needed the driver to die instantly, needed the truck to crash and burn and create a roadblock that nothing could pass. That meant aiming for a moving target the size of a human torso through a windshield at nearly 2 miles in conditions that had already made her miss once. Kira found the driver's heat signature through the windshield, a blob of white against the cooler interior. Not a person, not a man with a family and dreams and fears, just a target, just geometry. She had to think of it that way, had to reduce it to angles and ballistics. Because if she let herself think about the intimacy of this kill, about watching a human being die through a magnified scope from 2 miles away, she'd hesitate, and hesitation would kill the 12 men in the valley below. Lead calculation, 16 mils, a massive hold, aiming at a point in space that was nowhere near the actual truck. "Forgive me," she whispered. The words were ripped away by the wind before they left her lips. She fired. 1 Mississippi. The truck accelerated toward the bridge approach, the driver unaware that death was already in flight. 2 Mississippi. The bullet arced through its trajectory, buffeted by winds that were chaos and turbulence, guided by calculations that might be completely wrong. 3 Mississippi. The SEALs were moving, hauling their wounded toward the extraction point, trusting that Phantom would somehow stop 3 trucks with a rifle. 4 Mississippi. Kira didn't blink, didn't breathe, watched through the cracked scope as the truck approached the bridge. 5 Mississippi. The windshield shattered. The driver disappeared in a spray of glass and worse things. The truck swerved violently as dead hands pulled the wheel to the right. Front wheels hit the concrete bridge approach at the wrong angle. The vehicle slammed into the guardrail, metal screaming, momentum too great to stop. It rolled, once, twice, shedding parts and throwing sparks. The fuel tank ruptured. Gasoline met friction, met oxygen. The fireball lit up the valley like a miniature sun. The burning carcass of the truck settled across the width of the bridge, a wall of flame and twisted metal that nothing could pass. The convoy behind it slammed on brakes, fishtailing on the ice. The second and third trucks stopped short, blocked. Fighters began spilling out, silhouetted against the flames, shouting in confusion. "Bridges closed," Kira said into the radio. Her voice sounded hollow, distant, like it was coming from someone else. "Cobra 6, you have a clear route to extraction." "Copy, Phantom. We're moving." A pause, then, "That was... I don't even have words for what that was." Kira didn't respond. She was staring at the burning truck through her scope, watching heat signatures scatter in panic, and feeling absolutely nothing. The cold had taken more than just her fingers and toes. It had taken something deeper, something human. Later, she would feel it. Later, the weight of what she'd done would settle on her shoulders, and she'd carry it forever. Another ghost to add to the collection. But right now, she felt only the mission, only the geometry. "Phantom, we're approaching the extraction point." Wyatt's voice pulled her back. "LZ is hot. We've got dismounts from those trucks trying to flank us. Can you provide suppression?" Kira scanned the area around the extraction point. The fighters who dismounted from the block convoy were spreading out, using the terrain for cover, advancing on the SEAL position. She counted targets, 12, maybe 15, and she checked her magazine, 11 rounds left. The numbers didn't work. But the numbers hadn't worked for the last hour, and she'd made them work anyway. She began engaging targets with mechanical precision. 1 shot, 1 kill. 1 shot, miss, adjust, kill. Working down the magazine, each trigger pull bringing her closer to empty. And then, through the chaos and gunfire and her oxygen-starved tunnel vision, she heard a sound that was either salvation or death sentence. The thwop, thwop, thwop of helicopter rotors. The extraction bird, an MH-47 Chinook, massive and ungainly and beautiful. It came in low and fast, rear ramp already dropping, crew chief visible in the doorway. "Bird is down! Bird is down!" Wyatt was shouting. "Move, move, move!" But the enemy saw it too. The fighters who'd been advancing on the SEAL position abandoned cover and charged. A desperate suicidal rush toward the helicopter, knowing that if the Americans got aboard, the mission was over. 30 fighters, maybe more, all converging on that Chinook, and Kira had 6 rounds left. She fired. A runner with an RPG dropped. 5 rounds. Fired. A machine gunner setting up his weapon collapsed. 4 rounds. The fighters were at 200 meters now. Danger close. If she missed by 2 mils, she'd hit the helicopter's fuel sponsons. If she missed by 4 mils, she'd kill a SEAL. 3 rounds. 2 rounds. The SEALs were at the ramp now, loading their wounded, covering each other with carbine fire that was too short range to be effective. 1 round left. 4 fighters, 10 meters from the ramp. One of them was raising an AK-47, aiming at the exposed SEALs. Kira centered her crosshairs, held for wind that was gusting chaotically, pulled the trigger. A dry snap. The sound was small, insignificant. The metallic click of a firing pin striking an empty chamber. But in that moment, it was the loudest sound Kira had ever heard. She was Winchester, out of ammunition, empty. And there was a fighter with a loaded rifle 10 meters from killing the men she'd spent 13 hours protecting. "Behind you!" she screamed into the radio, her voice cracking. Wyatt spun, drew his sidearm. 3 shots, center mass. The fighter crumpled at the base of the ramp. "Clear! We're clear!" The crew chief was waving them aboard. "Go, go, go!" The Chinook's engines screamed as the pilot pulled collective. The massive bird lifted, nose dipping, gathering speed. It banked hard, climbing away from the valley, away from the fire and death and chaos, away to safety. "Phantom, we're wheels up!" Wyatt's voice in her ear, thick with emotion and exhaustion. "We're coming home. Give us your grid for extraction." Kira looked at her hands. They were shaking uncontrollably now, the adrenaline crash hitting like a freight train. She looked at her GPS. Elevation, 14,187 feet. Distance to valley floor, 3,000 vertical feet. Distance to nearest viable helicopter landing zone, 4,000 meters of descent through terrain she'd barely survived climbing up. She did the calculations. The Chinook was already running on fumes, having burned fuel hovering in the hot LZ while taking fire. The atmospheric conditions at 14,000 feet would require maximum engine power, power the bird didn't have. Even if they could reach her position, they couldn't hover long enough to extract her at this altitude. If they tried, they'd crash. And 12 men who just survived hell would die trying to save one sniper who'd made the choice to climb this mountain. "Negative, Cobra 6, Kira said. Her voice was calm now, quiet. The decision made. "Fuel is critical. RTB with your package." "Say again, Phantom. We're not reading you clearly." "I said return to base, Wyatt. That's an order from the on-scene commander." "Fuck that! We don't leave people behind. Give us your grid." Kira reached down and switched off her radio. The voices cut out. The static disappeared. The connection to the outside world severed. Silence returned to Devil's Gate. Just her and the wind, and the cold that was no longer kept at bay by adrenaline and purpose. She leaned back against the rock wall, pulling her knees to her chest, trying to conserve what little heat remained in her core. Below in the valley, fires still burned. The trucks, the village, small orange dots against the vast darkness. Above, stars were appearing as the storm cleared, more stars than she'd ever seen, the kind of sky that only existed at altitude, where the air was too thin to breathe. She thought about Sutherland, Wondered if he was listening when she went off frequency. Wondered if he knew, in that moment, that she'd chosen Devil's Gate after all. Wondered if he'd been right about the numbers failing. But the physics hadn't failed. 12 men were alive. The mission was complete. The cost was just higher than she'd calculated. Kira closed her eyes against the cold and whispered into the darkness. 39. 39 shots fired. 39 calculations made. 39 times she'd trusted the ballistics. And 39 times, despite everything, despite the impossible distance and the brutal conditions and the oxygen-starved decision-making, the numbers had held. It was enough. It had to be enough. The cold wrapped around her like a blanket, and Kira, Phantom Ashford, alone on a mountain peak that was slowly killing her, let the darkness take her. The kitchen was too warm. Kira frowned, looking at the wooden table in front of her. The afternoon sun streaming through the window was too bright, too hot. Sweat trickled down her spine, sticky and uncomfortable, beneath layers of clothing that suddenly felt suffocating. "Mom, can you turn down the heat?" Her voice sounded strange, distant, like she was hearing it through water. But her mother wasn't there. The kitchen was empty except for her. Empty and sweltering and wrong in ways she couldn't quite articulate through the fog filling her head. She stood up, intending to open a window, and realized she was wearing a heavy parka. Gore-Tex layers in insulation, completely inappropriate for a summer afternoon in Virginia. "Why am I wearing this?" She fumbled with the zipper, fingers clumsy and numb. "It's too hot. I can't breathe." The zipper came free. Cool air rushed in, blessed relief against overheated skin. She started pulling her arms out of the sleeves, desperate to escape the suffocating warmth. Somewhere far away, a voice was screaming at her, telling her to stop, warning her about something important. But the voice was cold and angry, and she was so hot, burning up from the inside, and all she wanted was to feel cool air against her skin. The parka slid off her shoulders and flapped in a wind that shouldn't exist in a closed kitchen. The voice screaming at her got louder, and suddenly the kitchen wasn't a kitchen anymore. Kira blinked, and she was lying on frozen stone, staring up at stars that burned like chips of ice against the black sky. Her parka was half off, one arm still tangled in a sleeve, the Gore-Tex fabric snapping in a wind that hit her exposed underlayer like 1,000 knives. The temperature wasn't too hot. It was minus 40 degrees, and she'd been trying to strip naked. "No," she gasped, horror cutting through the hypoxic hallucination. "No, no, no." Paradoxical undressing. The final stage of severe hypothermia, when the body's thermoregulation failed so catastrophically that freezing flesh felt like fire. The last thing people did before they died in the cold. She'd seen it once, in the Hindu Kush. A Marine caught in a blizzard, found the next morning stripped down to his t-shirt, frozen solid 50 yards from shelter. Dead because his brain had convinced him he was burning up. Kira grabbed the parka with hands that had no feeling, no fine motor control. Getting it back on was like trying to thread a needle while wearing oven mitts. The fabric fought her, the wind fought her own oxygen-starved brain fought her. She got one arm back in, then the other, but the zipper was beyond her capability now. Her fingers were just frozen clubs, useless meat attached to her wrists. She curled into a ball, trapping what little heat remained, and felt consciousness slipping away again. The voice came back. Not the angry one warning her about the parka, a different voice, calm, clinical, distant. "Phantom, Phantom, this is TOC, acknowledge." Major Cross, speaking from 300 miles away, from warmth and safety, and the certainty that he'd been right all along about reckless snipers in unauthorized positions. "Go away," Kira mumbled. The words came out slurred, barely coherent. "Trying to sleep." "Vance, damn it, answer me. Are you alive?" Was she? Kira wasn't entirely sure anymore. The line between alive and dead seemed very thin up here, very negotiable. Command to Phantom. Cobra 6 has landed. They are safe. All 12 personnel accounted for. Cross's voice was tight, professional, but there was something underneath it now. Not quite concern, but close. But I can't send a bird if you don't give me a pulse. Do you copy? 12. All 12 safe. The calculations had proven true. Kira tried to reach for her radio to key the mic, but her hand wouldn't obey. Her arm just lay there beside her, disconnected, belonging to someone else. I need you to activate your emergency beacon, Cross continued. Global Hawk is overhead. If you can light up, we can find you. Do you understand? Turn on your strobe. Her strobe. The MS-2000 distress marker clipped to her helmet. Somewhere nearby. Maybe. Everything was very far away now. But some deep survival instinct, some primal part of her brain that refused to die quietly on a frozen mountain, made her move. She rolled onto her stomach, crawled, 6 inches, a foot, following some dim memory of where she'd placed her gear. Her hand hit something hard, the helmet. She felt along its surface until her frozen fingers found the switch lever, hooked her thumb through it, pulled. The blue strobe light began to pulse, flash, flash, flash. To the naked eye, just a dim flicker. To any night vision device or thermal camera, a beacon that could be seen for miles. Visual confirmed. Cross's voice held relief now, genuine emotion breaking through the professional facade. I have you on thermal. Grid 37 Tango 9. Jesus, Vance, you're at 14,187 feet. A pause. Hang on, we're working the problem. Don't you dare close your eyes. But closing her eyes was all Kira wanted to do. The cold wasn't so bad anymore. It had moved beyond pain into a kind of peaceful numbness. Her body had stopped shivering hours ago, stopped trying to fight. Now it was just letting go. The kitchen came back. Warm sun, the smell of coffee, safe. She could just stay here, just drift away into the warmth. The crunch of a boot on snow. The sound cut through the hallucination like a gunshot, not from the radio, from nearby, on the ledge. Someone was here. Kira's eyes snapped open. Through blurred vision, she saw a figure standing over her. Male, maybe 30, wrapped in ragged wool and white camouflage that blended perfectly with the snow. He wore night vision goggles pushed up on his forehead, the strobe light too intense for the sensitive optics. One of the enemy fighters, a tracker who'd climbed up from the valley, following the reports of shots from the high peak, looking for the demon sniper who'd killed so many of his comrades. He looked down at her, saw the American flag patch on her shoulder, saw the ShyTac lying in the snow, saw a woman, half frozen, dying, defenseless. He unslung his AK-47, the barrel swung toward her chest. Cross's voice was screaming in her earpiece. Thermal contact proximity 5 meters. Defend yourself. Phantom, defend yourself. Kira couldn't move. Her body was done taking orders from her brain. The tracker's finger moved to the trigger, drew it back. A dry, metallic snap. The sound was almost funny. A small click instead of the roar of gunfire. The tracker stared at his weapon in confusion, racked the charging handle. The action was stiff, sluggish. The cheap lubricant in the Soviet-made receiver had turned to paste in the extreme cold. He pulled the trigger again. Another click. Kira felt something that might have been laughter bubbling up in her chest. The mountain killed everyone. Didn't matter which flag you fought under. Didn't matter if you were American or enemy. The cold didn't discriminate. The tracker cursed in a language she didn't understand, slung the useless rifle over his shoulder, reached for his belt and drew a long, curved knife. The blade wouldn't freeze. The blade wouldn't jam. He knelt beside her, and for a moment their eyes met. She saw him see her, not as an enemy, not as a target, just as another human being broken by the mountain. There was something almost like respect in his gaze. Then he raised the knife. Kira closed her eyes. The sound came first, a deep, rhythmic thumping that she felt through the stone before she heard it. The distinctive whop, whop, whop of rotor blades, growing louder, closer. The tracker's head jerked up, looking toward the sound. And then the mountain exploded. Not from ordnance, from rotor wash. The snow around them erupted into a violent hurricane of ice crystals and wind as a massive gray shape rose from the abyss beyond the ledge. An HH-60G Pavehawk helicopter hovering at the absolute edge of its performance envelope, engines screaming in protest at the thin air and heavy load. It had approached from below, using the terrain to mask its approach, flying a profile that was either brilliant or suicidal. Probably both. The side door was open. A minigun spun up, the barrels a blur of motion. The red laser designator painted the tracker's chest. He realized what was about to happen. Dropped the knife, tried to run. The rotor wash caught him like a physical blow. The downforce at this close range, enough to knock a grown man off his feet. He stumbled backward, arms windmilling, trying to keep his balance on ice-slicked stone. His boots slipped. He went over the edge without a sound, swallowed by the darkness and the 3,000-foot drop. The mountain claimed another one. Two figures jumped from the helicopter before it had fully stabilized. They moved with the aggressive purpose of men who'd done this 1,000 times. Men who'd pulled broken soldiers from places they had no business being. Para-rescue jumpers, PJs, the only special operations unit with a primary mission of saving lives instead of taking them. The first one was huge, maybe 6'4", 240, all of it muscle and determination. Master Sergeant Dalton Pierce. His face was hidden behind a ballistic mask, but his voice was clear and strong. "I've got you, Phantom. I've got you." He blocked the wind with his body, shielding her from the worst of the rotor wash. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, assessing damage. "She's critical," he shouted to his partner. "Paradoxical undressing. Core temps in the basement. Get the burrito." The second PJ, Technical Sergeant Finn Hargrave, was already unfolding a thermal extraction bag. The burrito, in PJ slang, a reflective cocoon with chemical heat packs that could bring someone back from the edge of death. If they weren't already too far gone, Pierce and Hargrave worked together like a machine, rolling Kira into the extraction bag, activating the heat packs, zipping her into the thermal cocoon. The chemical reactions started immediately, generating warmth that felt like fire against her frozen skin. "Vance, can you hear me?" Pierce's face was inches from hers, his eyes visible through the ballistic mask. Brown eyes, kind despite the tactical gear. "My name is Pierce. We're going home. Stay with me. That's an order." Kira tried to respond, but her jaw wouldn't work. The muscles were locked, frozen. Pierce didn't wait for an answer. He grabbed the ShyTac from where it lay in the snow. "Got the rifle. We leave nothing behind." They lifted her between them, carrying her toward the helicopter like she weighed nothing. The crew chief was leaning out the door, clipped to a safety line, waving them in. "Load and go! Load and go!" They slid her onto the deck of the Pavehawk. The metal floor vibrated with the scream of turbine engines pushed beyond their rated limits. Hargrave scrambled in beside her, already pulling out medical equipment. Pierce followed, slamming the door shut. "Package secure!" Pierce shouted into the internal comms. "Get us out of here!" The pilot didn't need to be told twice. The helicopter banked hard, diving away from the peak, trading altitude for airspeed. The negative G-force pressed Kira into the deck, making her stomach lurch. The vibration of the airframe rattled through her body. She could feel her heart beating, slow and irregular. Feel the warmth from the chemical packs starting to penetrate her layers. And feel something else, something wrong. Her heart stuttered, skipped a beat, then another. "Vitals are crashing!" Hargrave was staring at a portable monitor, watching her cardiac rhythm deteriorate in real time. "She's going into V-fib!" Pierce moved instantly, straddling her chest. positioning his hands. Starting compressions. The first compression cracked a rib. Kira heard it snap, felt a spike of pain cut through the numbness. Pierce didn't stop. Couldn't stop. 30 compressions. Hard and fast. The brutal mathematics of CPR. Breaking bones to save a life. Still no pulse. Hargrave checked the carotid artery, feeling for a heartbeat that wasn't there. It's the afterdrop. Cold blood from her extremities just hit her core. Her heart can't handle it. Afterdrop. The deadly phenomenon where rewarming hypothermia victims too quickly sent a wave of ice-cold blood from the extremities back to the heart, causing cardiac arrest. The thing that made frozen people die even after you brought them inside. Charge the defib, Pierce ordered, not breaking rhythm on the compressions. 200 joules. The defibrillator whined, capacitors charging. A high-pitched sound that cut through the roar of the engines. Clear! Pierce lifted his hands. Hargrave placed the paddles against Kira's chest, one below the collarbone, one on the ribs. Thud. Her body arched off the deck, every muscle contracting at once from the electrical current. Then she collapsed back down, limp. Pierce checked for a pulse. No change. Still VFib. She's too cold, Hargrave said, studying the temperature readout. Core temp is 84 degrees. Her heart won't restart until we get her above 86. We don't have time to warm her up slowly. Pierce looked at the IV line Hargrave had started. Push warm saline, all of it, and get me IO access. IO, intraosseous. When the veins had collapsed from cold and shock, the only way to get fluids and drugs into the body was to drill directly into the bone marrow. Hargrave pulled out a device that looked like a power drill with a large bore needle attached. He positioned it against Kira's shin, just below the knee. The drill whined. The needle punched through skin and muscle and into the hard cortex of the tibia with a sickening crunch. Through the haze of oxygen deprivation and cardiac arrest, some part of Kira registered the pain. A dull, horrible pressure deep in her bone. IO established, Hargrave said. He attached a syringe of epinephrine and pushed the plunger. The drug went directly into the bone marrow, the body's blood factory, flooding her system with adrenaline. Atropine followed. Then warm saline, heated to body temperature, pushed directly into the marrow to warm her core from the inside. Pierce resumed compressions. 30 more. Ribs creaking under the force. Charging again. 300 joules. The whine was higher pitched now. More energy, more violence to the system. Clear. Thud. Nothing. Pierce's jaw was set, his brown eyes hard with determination. Come on, Phantom. You didn't survive an army just to die in my bird. Come on. Another round of compressions. Another dose of epinephrine. Another shock. The rhythm on the monitor stayed chaotic. Ventricular fibrillation, the heart quivering uselessly instead of pumping blood. We're losing her, Hargrave said quietly. Like hell we are. Pierce positioned his hands for another round. Not on my watch. 30 compressions. Check pulse. No pulse. Shock again. And then, just as Pierce was about to start another round, the monitor beeped. Once. Then again. And again. The chaotic squiggle on the screen resolved into something recognizable. Spikes. Regular spikes. A rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. We have sinus rhythm. Hargrave's voice cracked with relief. Pulse is present, weak, thready, but it's there. Pierce sat back on his heels, breathing hard. Bag her. Keep her oxygenated until we can get her on a vent. Hargrave positioned a bag valve mask over Kira's face and began squeezing, forcing air into lungs that had forgotten how to breathe on their own. Kira gasped. It wasn't a conscious breath. It was a reflex, a violent, shuddering intake of air that sounded like a saw cutting wood. Her eyes rolled back, then focused for a split second on Pierce's face. Welcome back, he said softly. You gave us a scare. She tried to speak, but there was plastic tubing in her throat. an airway inserted to keep her from choking. All that came out was a wet gurgle. And then the pain hit. Not from her cracked ribs or the needle in her shin, from her hands. Blood was returning to tissue that had been frozen for hours, nerve endings screaming back to life. It felt like her hands were being held in fire, every fingertip burning with an intensity that made her whole body arch against the restraints. She tried to scream, but the tube silenced her. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, tracking through the dried blood and grime on her face. "I know," Pierce said, seeing the agony in her eyes. "I know it hurts. That means you're alive. That means we got you in time." To Hargrave, "Push morphine, 10 milligrams." The drug went into the IO port. Within seconds, the pain didn't disappear but drifted away, becoming something that was happening to someone else. Through the fog of morphine and oxygen deprivation, Kira heard the pilot's voice over the intercom. "Bagram Tower, this is Pedro 6-1, inbound with Priority 1 trauma. Soldier is ROSC, return of spontaneous circulation, but critical. Have the trauma team on the pad. We are coming in hot." The helicopter banked again, descending now, trading altitude for the thicker air where engines could breathe and hearts could beat. Kira's vision was blurring, darkening at the edges, but before consciousness slipped away completely, one thought pushed through the morphine haze. Her hand moved. Just a twitch, but movement. Her right hand trying to curl fingers that might not be there anymore into a familiar shape. The shape her hand made around a trigger. Pierce saw it. He gently took her damaged hand in his, stopping the movement. "War's over, Chief," he whispered. "Rest now." And Kira, who had spent 15 hours on a frozen mountain, defying every law of physics and medicine and common sense to keep 12 men alive, finally let herself rest. The darkness came, but this time it was warm. Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, Germany, 5 days later. The smell reached her before consciousness fully returned. Antiseptic, clean linen, the particular odor of industrial-grade disinfectant that every military hospital in the world seemed to use. Kira opened her eyes to fluorescent lights and acoustic ceiling tiles, the familiar surroundings of a recovery ward. She tried to lift her hand to shield her eyes from the harsh light. Her arm moved, heavy and sluggish, but her hand didn't respond. Instead, a massive white shape floated into her vision. Her hand was wrapped in layers of gauze, elevated on a pillow, looking more like a boxing glove than a functional appendage. "Easy, Chief. Don't try to move them." The voice was soft, professional. A nurse in blue scrubs was adjusting an IV line connected to a port in Kira's neck. "Where?" Kira's throat felt like she'd swallowed broken glass, her voice barely a rasp. "Landstuhl, you were medevaced from Bagram 2 days ago. You've been in and out of consciousness for 5 days total." The nurse checked a monitor, making notes on a tablet. "Pulmonary edema is clearing up. Kidney function is improving. You got lucky, Sergeant." Lucky. The word felt wrong. Lucky would have been following orders. Lucky would have been Ridge Alpha and a simple 1,200-meter shot. "My hands," Kira said. Not a question, a statement of fact. The nurse's expression shifted from professional to something sadder. "Dr. Kearns will be in to discuss your treatment plan. You should rest." Which meant it was bad. The nurse left. Kira lay there, staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the perforations. 8 holes per tile, 48 tiles visible from her bed, 384 total holes. A sniper's habit. Catalog the environment, find the patterns. Her hands throbbed with a deep, bone-level ache that the morphine drip couldn't quite touch. She could feel them, every nerve ending screaming. But when she tried to move her fingers, the disconnect between intention and reality was absolute. The door opened. Not a doctor. The rhythmic tap of dress shoes on linoleum announced the visitor before he appeared. Colonel Garrett Sutherland stood at the foot of her bed, 72 years old and looking every day of it. His service uniform was immaculate, ribbons gleaming, but his face was drawn, exhausted. He looked at her face first, then at her bandaged hands. Something in his eyes cracked. Just for a moment, the iron mask slipped, and she saw the weight he carried. The relief that she was alive, warring with the knowledge of what it had cost. "Vance," he said quietly. "Sir." Her voice was stronger now, fueled by the old anger that hadn't quite died on the mountain. "Am I under arrest?" A ghost of a smile touched Sutherland's lips. "Technically, you violated 3 direct orders. Abandon your assigned position, engage targets without authorization, risked a multi-million-dollar aircraft in 00 weather to extract you." He pulled a plastic chair closer to the bed but didn't sit. From his pocket, he drew a small, heavy object and placed it on the bedside table. A spent .375 Chi-Tac casing, twisted, scorched, but unmistakable. "The SEALs found this on the Chinook ramp. Must have fallen from your gear during the extraction. Master Sergeant Brenner wanted you to have it. He filed an after-action report that's currently giving the JAG lawyers a migraine. He credited you with 39 confirmed kills and 12 saves. Called you the Guardian of the Rockies." Sutherland's jaw tightened. "But the Army isn't the Navy, Phantom. We run on regulations. There's an investigation opened into your conduct. They're questioning whether your unauthorized actions provoked the ambush in the first place." Kira felt the old fury rising. They would have died in that valley. You know it. I know it. JAG knows it. "I know." Sutherland's voice was quiet, heavy with something that might have been regret. "Which is why I'm recommending medical retirement instead of a court-martial." He gestured to her hands. "The doctors briefed me. Grade 4 frostbite on the fingertips of your right hand. Grade 3 on the left. They're trying to save the palms, but the dexterity..." He paused. "It's gone, Kira. The fine motor control you need for precision shooting. The trigger finger." He met her eyes. "You're done. The sniping program is over for you." The words hung in the sterile air, final and suffocating. "I was wrong," Sutherland continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "At Beirut, at the inquiry 3 years ago, I thought I was protecting you from yourself, teaching you caution, but I was really teaching you my fear." He looked away, out the window at the German countryside. "You climbed to Devil's Gate because the physics said it was the only position that worked. You made 39 shots that shouldn't have been possible because you trusted the calculations over the fear. You saved 12 lives because you remembered what I taught you about ballistics and forgot what I taught you about doubt." He turned back to her. "You're a better sniper than I ever was, better than I could have been, because you weren't carrying my ghosts." Kira felt her throat tighten. "Ironside." "Now you heal," he interrupted, his voice firming back into command mode. "You go through rehab. You get your medals quietly in the mail because we can't publicize a mission that wasn't supposed to happen the way it did. And then you figure out what comes next." He straightened, drew himself to attention, and slowly, deliberately, raised his hand in a salute. It wasn't the sharp, crisp salute of the parade ground. It was slow, respectful, heavy with meaning. A salute from one warrior to another, from a legend to someone who had just become one. "Chief Warrant Officer Ashford," he said formally, "it has been an honor." Kira tried to return the salute, but her bandaged hand wouldn't cooperate. She settled for a nod, feeling tears she hadn't known were there tracking down her face. Sutherland lowered his hand, turned, and walked toward the door. "Sir," Kira called after him. He stopped but didn't turn around. "Why did you really come back? You didn't owe the Army anything. You didn't owe me anything after what happened at the inquiry." For a long moment he was silent. Then quietly, "Because I heard your name on the roster, and I thought maybe, one last time, I could teach you something. Turns out you were the one teaching me." He walked out, leaving Kira alone with the twisted brass casing and the weight of what she'd become. She lay there for a long time, staring at nothing. Then slowly, carefully, she tried to move her right index finger. Nothing happened. The finger that had pulled the trigger 39 times, that had made impossible shots through impossible conditions, was gone. Amputated at the first knuckle, the surgeon would later tell her. Too much tissue damage to save. But in her mind, she could still feel it. Could still feel the break of the trigger, crisp and clean. The phantom sensation of what she'd lost. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, Bethesda, Maryland, 2 weeks later. The Board of Inquiry room smelled of furniture polish and the particular tension that came from military bureaucracy deciding someone's fate. Chief Warrant Officer Kira Ashford stood at the position of attention in front of the long mahogany table, wearing her dress blues. The uniform was tailored perfectly, hiding the weight she'd lost in the ICU. The ribbons on her chest were aligned with micrometer precision. Her brass gleamed, but her right hand wore a black leather glove. Regulation for formal events, hiding the bandages that covered the stumps where her trigger finger and middle finger used to be. Colonel Strickland, the presiding officer, looked up from the file in front of him. His eyes were gray, bureaucratic, designed for reading regulations rather than reading terrain. Chief Warrant Officer Ashford, this board has been convened to determine the facts regarding Operation Silent Shepherd, specifically your deviation from the assigned operational plan and your subsequent engagement of enemy forces from an unauthorized position. Do you understand the gravity of these proceedings? Yes, sir. Kira's voice was steady, but her legs trembled slightly. Not from fear, from the nerve damage that still hadn't fully healed. Good. Strickland nodded to the JAG captain seated beside him. Captain Ellis, proceed. Captain Ellis was young, sharp, eager. A lawyer who saw the world in black and white, lawful and unlawful. He stood, pacing slightly. Chief Ashford, on January 14th, you were ordered to occupy Observation Post Ridge Alpha. Is that correct? Yes, sir. You did not occupy OP Ridge Alpha. Instead, you climbed to an elevation of 14,187 feet to a position you designated as Devil's Gate. Why? OP Ridge Alpha was compromised, sir. I identified enemy heat signatures consistent with an ambush team. Did you report this compromise to command? No, sir. Why not? Because radio transmission would have alerted the enemy to my presence, and by extension to the incoming SEAL element. Radio silence was the only tactical advantage I had. Ellis stopped pacing, turned to face her. So you decided, unilaterally, to abandon your post, ascend to a lethal altitude without supplemental oxygen, and engage targets at a distance of 3,280 meters, a distance that exceeds the maximum effective range of your weapon system by nearly a kilometer. The weapon's effective range is a guideline, sir, not a physical law. Physics is a physical law, Chief. Ellis's voice was sharp now, prosecutorial. You fired 39 rounds into a dynamic battlefield involving friendly forces. You fired over the heads of U.S. Navy SEALs. One miscalculation, one gust of wind, and you would be standing here for manslaughter charges. I didn't miss, sir. But you could have. Ellis pressed harder. You rolled the dice with 12 lives. That's not heroism, Chief Ashford. That's recklessness. That's a violation of the rules of engagement, which explicitly state, bang. The double doors at the back of the hearing room didn't just open. They were thrown open hard enough to slam against the walls. Colonel Strickland's gavel came down. Order! This is a closed hearing. Who is... He stopped. Walking through the doors was a phalanx of blue. 7 men in Navy dress uniforms, marching in lockstep with the synchronized precision of men who'd operated together under fire. Leading them was Master Sergeant Wyatt Brenner, leaning heavily on a cane, his right arm still in a sling. Behind him, the surviving members of SEAL Team Cobra 6. Some had bandages visible above their collars. Others bore the careful movement of men with wounds that hadn't fully healed. They moved to the center aisle, stopped 10 feet behind Kira, and slammed to attention with a single, thunderous report of boot heels on hardwood. "Master Sergeant Brenner," Strickland said, his face darkening, "you are interrupting a military legal proceeding. Explain yourself before I have the MPS remove you." "With all due respect, Colonel," Wyatt said, his voice carrying the gravel of too many years shouting commands over gunfire. "We are material witnesses, and we weren't invited. We have a problem with that." "We have your statements, Master Sergeant," Captain Ellis interjected nervously. "They're in the file." "Paper doesn't bleed, Captain." Wyatt's eyes were hard as flint. He stepped forward, the cane tapping against the floor. "Paper doesn't know what it's like to hear Broken Arrow on the radio and understand that you're about to die in a valley 300 miles from home." He turned to face Strickland directly. "Sir, the JAG here talks about recklessness, about what could have happened. I was on that ground. We were pinned down, taking fire from an L-shaped ambush we didn't even know existed. Mortars, machine guns, RPGs. We called for close air support. Denied. We called for quick reaction force. Denied." He glared at Ellis. "The only thing that wasn't denied was the bullet from that ridge." Wyatt moved to stand beside Kira, shoulder to shoulder. "Chief Ashford didn't roll the dice. She calculated the odds down to the milliradian and then beat them 39 times. She gave her hands for my team, Colonel." He gestured to the 6 SEALs behind him. "If you want to dishonor her for that, you'll have to dishonor all of us, because we're only standing in this room today because she stood on that mountain." The silence that followed was absolute. The weight of loyalty and blood and shared survival filled the space like a physical presence. Strickland looked at Wyatt, then at the SEALs standing like statues, then at Kira, seeing her properly for the first time. Not as a problem to be solved or a regulation to be enforced, but as a soldier who'd made an impossible choice and paid for it in flesh. He closed the file in front of him with a soft thump. "Captain Ellis," Strickland said quietly, "sit down." "Sir, I haven't finished." "I said sit down." Ellis sat, looking deflated. Strickland leaned forward, his fingers laced together. "Chief Ashford, the regulations are clear. You disobeyed direct orders. In a peacetime army, that would be the end of your career. But we are not at peace, and the outcome of your actions cannot be ignored." He picked up a document. "The Navy has formally requested that you be awarded the Silver Star for valor. It would be incongruous for the Army to court-martial a recipient of the Silver Star for the same action that earned the medal." He paused. "However, your injuries are disqualifying. You can no longer fire a weapon to the precision standard required for your military occupational specialty. You can no longer serve in a combat capacity." He picked up a stamp. "This board finds that your actions, while unauthorized, were justified by the exigent circumstances of the tactical situation. The charges of recklessness and dereliction of duty are dismissed." Thump. The stamp hit the paper. "You are recommended for medical retirement with full honors and benefits, effective immediately. Do you accept this finding?" Kira looked at Strickland, then at Wyatt, who gave her a barely perceptible nod. The career she'd built, the identity she'd forged in fire and ballistics in frozen mountains, gone with a stamp and a sentence. But 12 men were standing behind her, alive because of what she'd traded. "I accept, sir." "Then this hearing is adjourned," Strickland stood. "And Chief, thank you for your service." He gathered his papers and left through the side door. Ellis followed, looking like he'd swallowed something bitter. Kira stood there trembling. It was over. The military, the sniping, the only life she'd known since she was 19 years old. She felt a hand on her shoulder, heavy, warm. "Told you we'd walk you out," Wyatt said softly. She turned to look at him. "I don't know where to walk to, Wyatt. This was all I knew." "You walk forward, Phantom, same as you did on the mountain, one step at a time." He turned to his men. "Cobra 6, present arms." The SEALs snapped to attention, raising their hands in salutes so sharp they could cut steel. Not saluting an officer, not following protocol, saluting a guardian angel who'd sat on a frozen mountain and defied physics to keep them alive. Kira straightened her back, ignoring the pain in her damaged legs. She raised her black-gloved hand to her brow, returning the salute with the fingers she had left. It was her last salute as an active-duty soldier, and the only one that truly mattered. High Desert Long Range Center, Wyoming, 6 months later. The wind here spoke in a different language than the wind on Devil's Gate. It didn't scream, it whispered, flowing through sagebrush with a dry rustling that carried the scent of pine and sun-heated dust. Autumn had turned the landscape gold and amber, the kind of light that made everything look like a photograph from a better time. Kira stood behind the firing line, hands tucked into the pockets of a fleece jacket. The black gloves were gone, replaced by custom prosthetic sheaths that covered the stumps of her missing fingers. Functional if you didn't need fine motor control. Useless for pulling a trigger, but perfect for teaching others how to do it. On the firing line, a young Army corporal was prone behind a rifle, squinting through his scope at a target 1,200 meters downrange. "I don't get it," he muttered, frustration evident in his voice. "Kestrel says 5 miles per hour from the left. I'm holding half a mil. I keep missing right." He slapped the expensive ballistic computer clipped to his rifle. This thing must be broken. Kira didn't say anything immediately. She leaned down, looking through her spotting scope at the terrain between the shooter and the target. "The machine isn't broken, Corporal," she said quietly. "It's just blind." "Ma'am? Look at the grass, not here, there at 600 meters, in that draw." The corporal shifted his scope, scanning the indicated area. "It's moving right to left." "Exactly," Kira said. "You have a headwind here at the firing line, but there's a crosswind in the draw, moving perpendicular to your bullet's path. The computer only knows what's happening in your hand. It doesn't know the terrain, doesn't know the river." "The river?" "Wind is a fluid, Corporal, like water. It flows over ridges and pools and valleys. You have to read the entire river, not just test the water at the bank." She pulled her modified hand from her pocket, using it to point down range. The prosthetic fingers were crude, mechanical, nothing like the sensitivity she'd once had. But they were enough for this. "Ignore the computer. Trust your eye. Hold 1.2 mils left. Send it." The corporal hesitated. It was double what the ballistic calculator suggested, contradicting the expensive technology he'd been taught to rely on. But he looked at Kira, at the woman who'd made 39 impossible shots from an impossible position, and decided to trust her judgment over the machine. He settled behind the rifle, adjusted his hold, controlled his breathing, squeezed. Crack! The rifle fired. Kira watched through her spotting scope, tracking the bullet's path by the disturbance it left in the air. The round arced high, cutting through the invisible crosswind in the draw, drifting left, then correcting back. Ding! The sound of copper meeting steel rang out across the range. A puff of chalk dust appeared dead center on the target. "Impact! Center mass!" The corporal's voice was filled with disbelief and excitement. He turned to look at her, grinning. "How did you know?" Kira smiled, a small, private expression. "The mountain talks, Corporal. You just have to listen." She stepped back, letting him work. Her job here was done. She walked toward the small cabin that served as the range office. Inside, on her desk, sat a wooden box. She opened it occasionally when the phantom pain in her missing fingers got too intense, when she needed to remember that the loss had meaning. Inside, a Silver Star medal and a challenge coin machined from a spent .375 casing. Coordinates of Devil's Gate engraved on one side. 3 words on the other. Guardian. Always. Eternal. She rarely touched them. The weight was always with her anyway. Kira stepped onto the cabin porch and looked west, toward the jagged silhouette of the rock Iez rising against the sunset. They reminded her of other mountains, colder and higher and infinitely more deadly. For months after Germany, she'd feared the silence, had filled her apartment with television, with music, with any noise that could drown out the memory of that frozen void where she'd waited to die. But out here, under the vast Wyoming sky, the silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of 12 men waking up each morning. Wyatt with his daughter's soccer games. The corpsman with twin boys he'd almost never met. The breacher who'd proposed to his girlfriend the day after they got back. Full of children who still had fathers. Full of wives who didn't have to fold a flag. Full of breath and life and the calculations that had made it possible. She raised her prosthetic hand and rubbed the ache in her knuckles where the cold still lived, even 6 months later. Sutherland had said she was done. He'd been wrong. The trajectory hadn't ended, it had just changed direction. She wasn't the bullet anymore. She was the scope, the teacher, the one who helped others find their targets. Kira took a deep breath of the cool autumn air. It tasted of sage and pine and freedom. She whispered to the mountains, to the memory of Devil's Gate and everything she'd left there. 39. The mountains didn't answer back. They just stood, solid and eternal, witnesses to what had been and what would come. It was enough. Her phone buzzed. A text message from a number she recognized. Sutherland. Heard you're teaching the wind. Proud of you, Phantom. Ironside. She looked at the message for a long moment, then typed back with clumsy, prosthetic fingers. You taught me the math. I'm teaching them the courage. She hit send, slipped the phone back in her pocket, and turned to walk inside. The next rotation of students would be arriving soon. Young snipers who needed to learn that the physics always worked, that the impossible was just a calculation nobody had solved yet, that sometimes the only position that made sense was the one everyone said was suicide, and she would teach them. Not from a frozen mountain peak, not through a cracked scope lens, not with fingers wrapped around a trigger, but with the wisdom earned from 39 shots that shouldn't have been possible, with the knowledge that came from giving everything and finding out it was exactly enough. Kira Phantom Ashford, 27 years old, retired sniper, walked back inside to prepare the next lesson. Behind her, the sun touched the peaks of the Rockies, painting them gold and crimson. And somewhere in the distance, the wind whispered through the sage, carrying secrets that only those who listened could hear. The legacy of Devil's Gate lived on, not in medals or citations or official records, but in the steady hands of young shooters learning to read the wind, in 12 families that remained whole, in the knowledge that sometimes the right choice was also the hardest one, and in the quiet certainty that when the numbers say it's impossible, that's exactly when you trust them most. 39 shots, 39 lives, one mountain, one choice, and a story that would be whispered in sniper schools for generations. The story of the woman who climbed to heaven's gate and brought 12 men back from hell.